The quiet hum of suburban life had been the soundtrack of my days for years. I had become accustomed to the monotony, the smell of fresh laundry drying on the line, the soft chirp of crickets as evening approached, and the predictable rhythm of my husband's long workdays. Our home was comfortable, well-kept, and filled with all the things that should make a woman content. But I wasn't content. I was suffocating in my own life, trapped in a routine that left me unfulfilled. It wasn't that my husband wasn't good to me. In many ways he was. He was kind, reliable, and cared for me in his own way. But there was a distance, a gap that had grown between us over the years. The fire we once shared had dimmed to a faint glow, and I was left with a yearning I couldn't quite explain. That's when I noticed him. I had always known our neighbor's son was around, but it wasn't until that summer that I really saw him. There was something different about the way he carried himself. At 19, he was a man now, not a boy, and his athletic build and confident stride made him impossible to ignore. His skin was the richest shade of brown, glowing against the sun, and his smile, his smile, was full of youthful promise, as if he knew exactly what he wanted and how to get it. It started with simple exchanges, casual hellos over the fence as I hung laundry, or brief pleasantries as he passed by while I watered the garden. But soon the glances became longer. His eyes lingered just a moment too long, and I found myself looking back, heart racing in a way I hadn't experienced in years. Each time I saw him, I felt an ache deep inside me, a desire I had long forgotten. I tried to push the feeling down. He's just a kid, I told myself. This is wrong. I had a husband, a life, and a marriage to protect. But the temptation was undeniable. One afternoon, I was trimming the hedges along our driveway when I felt his presence behind me. I straightened up, wiping the sweat from my brow, and turned to find him standing there, leaning against the fence with a relaxed yet knowing smile on his face. "You're looking beautiful today," he said, his voice low and warm. The compliment hit me harder than I expected. I had been married for over a decade, and the only compliments I received now were from my husband, and those were often mumbled as he rushed out the door. But hearing those words from him, from someone younger, more vibrant, it did something to me. I laughed nervously, unsure of how to respond. "Thank you. You look good too." His smile widened, and he took a step closer. "You're always so kind," he said, his eyes not leaving mine. There was something in his gaze that unsettled me. It wasn't the innocent gaze of a young man. It was the look of someone who knew exactly what they wanted and wasn't afraid to pursue it. My heart fluttered. I felt a thrill in my chest that I hadn't felt in years. We stood there for a moment, locked in an unspoken understanding, and I wondered how long it would take before we both gave in to the growing pull between us. As the days went by, the tension between us only intensified. Each time I saw him, I felt it, the glances, the words, the touches that were just a little too lingering. It was becoming impossible to ignore. I began to fantasize about him in ways that terrified me. I was drawn to him not just because of his youth, but because of the vitality he brought into my life. He was everything I no longer was. Fresh, untamed, full of promise. One evening, as I was on my way to pick up some groceries, I saw him again. He was standing by his car, his shirt clinging to his broad shoulders, sweat glistening on his skin. I couldn't help but notice the way the muscles in his arms flexed as he leaned against the vehicle. I swallowed hard. "Hey," he called out, his voice carrying through the evening air. "You need help with anything?" My mind screamed no, this was wrong. I shouldn't be doing this. But my body betrayed me. I found myself walking toward him, a smile tugging at my lips. "No, I'm fine," I said, but it was a lie. I could feel my pulse quickening, my breath shallow. I didn't know how much longer I could hold myself back. The moment we were face to face, the air between us felt charged, as if something electric was pulsing in the space. He didn't speak right away. Instead, he took a step closer, his presence overwhelming. I could smell his cologne, rich and spicy like the earth after rain. It was intoxicating. "You sure?" he asked, his hand brushing lightly against my arm. The touch was gentle, yet it sent a shockwave through me. I flinched at the contact, but instead of pulling away, I stood frozen. He studied my face for a moment, and I could see the hunger in his eyes. "This is wrong," my mind screamed. But my heart was beating so loudly in my chest that I couldn't hear anything else. Just then, the sound of a car pulling into the driveway broke the spell. It was my husband back from work. I quickly stepped back, flustered, my breath ragged. "Maybe some other time," I said, my voice shaky. I turned to walk away, but not before I glanced back at him one last time. His eyes followed me, burning with an intensity that made my skin tingle. As I hurried inside, I felt a wave of guilt crash over me. This can't happen. I can't do this, But the truth was, I wasn't sure anymore. If you're enjoying the story and curious to know what happens next, whether this forbidden attraction will lead to something more, be sure to like and subscribe. You don't want to miss the twists and turns of this tale. There's so much more to uncover. I couldn't stop thinking about him that night, and as the days passed, I found myself caught in his web, unable to resist. It was as if I were living on the edge of a cliff, knowing that one more step would send me spiraling into something I might not be able to stop. But would I stop? Could I? The days blurred together, each one indistinguishable from the last. But all I could focus on was him. The young man from next door had become an obsession. The lingering glances, the subtle touches, the heated exchanges between us. They consumed my thoughts day and night. I told myself I was overreacting. He was just a kid. This was nothing more than a fleeting attraction. Had a life, family, a husband. But each time I saw him, the connection between us deepened, pulling me further away from the life I had known. I tried to distract myself, cleaning the house, tending to the garden, running errands. But nothing seemed to quench the hunger that had awakened in me. And then, one afternoon it happened. I was out on the porch, watching the sun dip below the horizon, when I heard footsteps behind me. Without turning around, I knew who it was. His presence was as familiar to me now as my own breath. "Hey, Mrs. Thompson," he called. His voice warm and casual, like it had become our personal greeting. I glanced over my shoulder, forcing a smile, trying to keep my composure. "Hey there, Jason. What's up?" He was standing at the edge of the porch, his tall frame silhouetted against the setting sun. There was something magnetic about him, his posture, his confidence. It was all so alluring, and in that moment I could feel. The old walls I had spent years building around myself started to crumble. "I was wondering if you needed any help with that garden," he said, his eyes locking onto mine. "Looks like it's a lot of work for just one person." I should have said no. I should have turned him away, made some excuse, anything to keep my distance. But instead, I felt the familiar pulse of excitement race through my veins. Sure," I said, my voice almost too soft. "I suppose I could use a hand." He grinned and my heart skipped. "Great, I'll grab the tools and be right over." I watched as he walked off toward his house, his broad shoulders moving with effortless grace. My breath caught in my throat. What was happening to me? This wasn't just a friendly interaction anymore. It was something more, something dangerous. A few minutes later he was back, tools in hand. He set them down beside me, his eyes never leaving mine. The heat between us was undeniable. The air felt thick with tension, and every glance, every movement seemed to bring us closer to the edge. "I don't mind helping you out," he said, his voice lower now, almost intimate. "I enjoy spending time with you, Mrs. Thompson. You've always been so kind to me." His words sent a thrill through me, and I struggled to maintain my composure. I wasn't the same woman I had been years ago, but in that moment, I felt more alive than I had in ages. There was a spark between us, a connection I couldn't ignore, no matter how much I wanted to. "You're welcome," I replied, my voice barely a whisper. "But you don't have to do this. You have your own things to do." "I like helping you," he said with a smirk. "Besides, I've got nothing better to do." He knelt down beside me and began trimming the bushes. I tried to focus on the task at hand, but it was impossible. His presence was overwhelming. The scent of his cologne, the flex of his muscles as he worked. It was all I could think about. My skin tingled with anticipation, and I had to fight the urge to reach out and touch him. It wasn't long before the heat of the moment got to me. I could feel his eyes on me as I knelt beside him, adjusting the flower pots, feeling his gaze like a physical touch. I wanted him. More than anything, I wanted to let go of all my inhibitions and give in to the desire that had been growing inside me. "Mrs. Thompson," he said. His voice much, much closer than before. I looked up to find him standing directly beside me. His eyes darker now, full of something I couldn't quite name. "You know you're still as beautiful as I remember." My heart raced. I couldn't look away. "Jason, please," I started to say, but the words died in my throat. "Don't worry," he whispered, his voice a low, enticing murmur. "I'm not going to do anything unless you want me to." The moment hung in the air like forbidden fruit, ripe for the picking. I was torn between guilt and longing, between the woman I had been and the one I was becoming. I wasn't sure what was more dangerous, giving in to him or walking away. "Maybe we should stop," I said, my voice barely audible. I was trying to find a way to pull myself back, but deep down I didn't want to stop. "I understand," he said, his voice soft and understanding. But then his hand reached out to touch mine, just the barest of contact, a brush of his fingers against my skin. The shock of it sent a jolt through my body. I could feel the weight of the moment pressing in on me, and for a heartbeat I thought I might lose control. His touch was electrifying, awakening parts of me I thought I had buried long ago. Suddenly, I heard the sound of a car pulling into the driveway. My husband. I snapped out of my trance, pulling my hand away and standing up too quickly, almost stumbling over my feet. Jason stepped back, his expression unreadable. "Maybe I'll help you another time," he said, his voice suddenly distant. I nodded, too embarrassed to speak. "Yeah, maybe." As I walked back to the house, my pulse still racing, I felt a mix of emotions flooding over me. Guilt, desire, shame. I had come so close to crossing a line, and part of me wanted to, desperately. But the other part, the part that still had a family, a home, a life, that part was terrified. The next few days felt like a storm brewing on the horizon. Every time I glanced at Jason, I felt the weight of the unspoken tension between us. I tried to push it away, telling myself it was just a fleeting attraction, nothing more. But deep down I knew the truth. It wasn't just a passing desire. It was something deeper, something more dangerous. Jason was different from the men I had known. He was bold, confident, and so full of life. His presence was intoxicating, and it made me feel alive in a way I hadn't felt in years. Every glance, every touch left me wanting more. But I couldn't let myself give in. Not yet. I had to be careful. That night, as I sat alone in the living room, I heard a knock at the door. It was late, almost 10 p.m., and my husband was still at work. A strange sense of anticipation washed over me as I walked toward the door. When I opened it, there he was, Jason. His tall frame stood in the dim light of the porch, and I could see the faint outline of a grin on his face. "I hope I'm not bothering you," he said softly, his voice low and full of something I couldn't quite place. My heart skipped a beat. Had to stop this. I should have told him to leave, to go back to his own home and forget about me. But instead I stood there, frozen, caught between desire and guilt. "No, you're not bothering me," I finally said, my voice shaky, betraying the turmoil inside me. Jason stepped closer, his gaze never leaving mine. "I've been thinking about you," he said, his words sending a shock wave through my body. "About us." I swallowed hard, suddenly aware of how close he was. "Jason, this isn't right," I whispered, but the words came out weak, lacking conviction. "Why isn't it right?" he asked, his hand reaching out to brush a stray lock of hair from my face. The touch was so gentle, but it ignited something inside me, something I couldn't control. I wanted to push him away, to close the door, to retreat to the safety of my old life. But instead, I found myself stepping aside to let him in. I don't know, I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. But I can't stop thinking about you. His smile deepened and he stepped inside. The moment he crossed the threshold, the tension in the room seemed to heighten. I could feel the air between us crackling with desire. We stood there for a moment, neither of us moving. Then slowly, Jason reached for me, his hands cupping my face as he pulled me toward him. I didn't stop him. The kiss was soft at first, tentative, as if we were both testing the waters. But the moment his lips touched mine, everything else seemed to fade away. It was as if I had been holding my breath for years, waiting for something or someone to wake me up. And he did. The kiss deepened, his hands sliding down my back, pulling me closer. I could feel the heat of his body pressing against mine, and I knew I had crossed a line I could never uncross. But I didn't care. I was consumed by him, by the raw energy between us, and nothing else seemed to matter. The sound of my husband's car pulling into the driveway snapped me out of my haze. My heart pounded in my chest, panic flooding my senses. Jason pulled away just as quickly as he had kissed me, his eyes wide with understanding. "We need to stop," I said, pushing him gently away, my breath coming in quick bursts. But even as I said the words, part of me didn't want to stop. "Don't worry," Jason said, his voice low and reassuring. "I'm not going anywhere." He stepped back but not far enough. I could still feel the heat from his body radiating toward me. I needed him to leave. I needed to protect my family, my life. But part of me, a big part of me, didn't want to. I heard my husband's voice calling from the garage, and in that moment, I realized just how much danger I was in. This affair, this desire for Jason, it was a threat to everything I had built. "I'll go," Jason said, his eyes never leaving mine. "But this isn't over." I nodded, my heart pounding in my chest as I hurried to open the door. As he stepped outside, he turned back one last time, his gaze intense. "You'll call me," he said. It wasn't a question. It was a command. And I knew deep down that I would. I closed the door behind him, my body still trembling. I had crossed a line, and no matter how much I tried to deny it, I knew I couldn't go back. The next few days were a blur. My mind was consumed with thoughts of him. I couldn't focus on anything else. Every time I saw Jason, I felt that overwhelming desire, but I couldn't let it consume me, not yet. I tried to push him out of my mind, to focus on my husband, to pretend everything was normal. But the truth was, it wasn't. Nothing was normal anymore. I was living a lie, and Jason was the secret I couldn't keep. The next time I saw him was just as inevitable as the first. He had been waiting for me. I had no idea how he had known I would be there, but when I stepped outside to grab the mail, he was leaning casually against the fence, watching me with that same intense gaze. "I was wondering if we could talk," he said, his voice soft yet insistent. I hesitated, my heart racing. "I don't know if that's a good idea, Jason." But he stepped closer, and before I could say anything else, he cupped my face again, tilting my chin up toward him. "You're thinking about it, aren't you?" he asked, his voice a whisper just for me. I didn't answer him. I didn't need to. The attraction, the desire, it was undeniable. And once again I felt myself losing control. "Maybe we should talk," I finally said, my voice trembling. "But not here, not now." Jason smiled a knowing smile, as if he had already won. "I'll wait," he said. "But you'll call me." "I know you will." I nodded, unable to say anything else. "If you're as curious as I am to see where this will lead, whether I'll fall deeper into this forbidden affair or pull myself back, make sure to like and subscribe. This story is just getting started, and the stakes are about to get even higher." With each passing day, I found myself more and more drawn to him, and the line between right and wrong became harder to see. Would I give in? Would I let this affair consume me completely? Or would I walk away before it was too late? Only time would tell. It's strange the way desire can overtake you, how, despite your best efforts, it finds its way into the cracks of your life and slips inside, making itself at home. I had always thought of myself as a strong woman, focused, disciplined, and loyal to my family. But now it felt as if I was no longer the person I once knew. I was slipping, losing myself to a craving I couldn't control. Jason had become a constant, like a ghost haunting the corners of my thoughts. The following days passed in a haze of anticipation and guilt. I could barely focus on anything, my mind consumed by the memory of his touch, the heat of his kiss. Every time I saw him, whether across the fence or on the rare occasions when our paths crossed in the driveway, my body betrayed me, the longing written plainly on my face. But the danger was real. I knew it, even if I didn't want to admit it. My husband, oblivious to the growing storm in our home, was busy with work and his own distractions. I should have been grateful for his steady presence, his devotion, but I wasn't. The more I saw Jason, the more I resented the life I had, the one that felt so suffocating. Jason represented freedom, excitement, and the raw intensity one had long forgotten. One afternoon, I stood at the kitchen window, absent-mindedly washing dishes, when I saw him outside. He was leaning against his car, eyes scanning the street. But the moment he saw me, he straightened, his gaze locking onto mine. My heart fluttered, and I could feel the tension building between us once again. I dried my hands quickly and stepped outside, as if pulled by an invisible force. "Hey," I said, trying to sound casual, though my voice wavered with the electricity of the moment. "Hey," Jason replied, his lips curving into that confident, knowing smile that made me weak in the knees. "I was hoping I'd catch you." I tried to look away, to gather my thoughts, but it was impossible. His presence was overwhelming. "You've been on my mind a lot," he added, his voice smooth, low, so damn enticing. I swallowed hard, my pulse quickening. "Jason, we shouldn't." He stepped closer, and before I could finish, he cupped my face, his touch gentle but insistent. "I don't care about the shoulds, Mrs. Thompson. I care about what we want. And I know what we both want." Every word he spoke felt like a promise, a lure I was too weak to resist. I had tried to hold on to my resolve, tried to tell myself that I could end this madness before it went too far. But with each moment we shared, I was drawn deeper into his world, further away from the life I had built. Before I knew it, he was kissing me again, his lips crashing into mine with a hunger that felt both urgent and familiar. I couldn't pull away. I didn't want to. The kiss was more than just physical. It was an explosion of everything I had been trying to ignore. My body responded to him, every part of me alive in a way I hadn't experienced in years. I didn't hear the car pulling into the driveway at first. The sound of the door slamming shut made me freeze, and I pulled away from him in panic. Jason's expression faltered, but he didn't pull back. Instead, he whispered, "Don't worry. Let him see if he must." I shook my head, my heart racing. "Whoa. No, this isn't right." But the damage had already been done. As I turned to face the door, I saw my husband standing there, staring at us with wide eyes. His jaw clenched, his face pale with shock. "Beth," he said, his voice hoarse. "What the hell is going on here?" The room spun. I didn't know what to say. I had been caught in the act of betrayal, in the act of giving in to something I couldn't control. The weight of the moment crashed down on me, and I felt my knees weaken. Jason stepped back, his expression unreadable. "I think it's time for me to go," he said, his voice colder than I had ever heard it. My husband's gaze didn't leave me. He was silent, his anger simmering beneath the surface, his fists clenched at his sides. "Whoa. Stay," he snapped, his voice full of tension. "I want to know what's going on now." Jason hesitated, glancing at me one last time before turning and walking toward the gate. My heart was pounding in my chest as I stood there, motionless like a deer caught in the headlights. "Don't you dare walk away," my husband barked, his voice sharp. But Jason didn't listen. He didn't need to. He had already said everything that needed to be said. And as he stepped out of the gate, leaving me with the mess I had created, I knew there was no going back. My husband's eyes were filled with disbelief.